I'm really, really proud to share or to be on stage with our keynote speaker tonight, Frances Messano. In a moment, I'm going to say a few words, but I'm just going to make a note. So I know that visually it's strange because we're standing up here in their chairs, and why are we sitting down? Neither of us are actually dress appropriate for these seats, and so we figure we would stand, but hey, let's just go with it. And so if that's okay, we're going to be standing during our Q&A. By the way, thank you guys for being so generous tonight. It's just incredible, the atmosphere. Unbelievable, unbelievable. Thank you so much, and it's going to make such a difference for our community. All right, Frances, you ready for me to embarrass you with an intro right here, right now?
I'm ready.
All right, let's do it.
Let's go.
Frances Messano is president at NewSchools Venture Fund and actually the incoming CEO, transitioning to CEO in January 2023. In this role, Frances leads the organization's strategy and oversees its $45 million annual grant-making budget that is focused on 4 investment areas: innovative schools, learning solutions, diverse leaders, and racial equity. Throughout Frances' 7-year tenure at NewSchools, she has had a broad set of responsibilities, including creating the Diverse Leaders Investment Strategy and leading the Innovative Schools team. Previously, Frances served as vice president at Teach for America. We have TFA shared in our background, incredibly exciting, where Frances led the development of the organization's long-term national strategy. Oh, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Ask and you shall receive. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Oh, yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. I'll take one. Oh, great. Look at that. Thank you so much. And before that, Frances was an associate partner at the Monitor Institute, which is the social impact practice within Monitor Deloitte's strategy consulting arm. We have Deloitte in the house tonight, where Frances, that's right, all in the family, where Frances helped educational organizations scale their impact through strategy development, organizational design, leadership development, and program design. Frances has an MBA from Harvard Business School and an AB from Harvard College. She serves on the board of UNIDOS, US, Stand for Children, Pahara Institute, and Latinos for Education. Frances is also on the Tipping Point Leadership Council and a Pahara Aspen Education Fellow. She is a first-generation college graduate, and so she... Yeah, absolutely, please. Absolutely. Tonight we're going to absolutely talk with Frances about her background and the depth to which she's able to really understand the journey that our students really go through. And last but not least, Frances is the alum of several nonprofit organizations, not unlike Minds Matter, Bay Area, that Frances credits with helping her gain access to educational equity. I'm really proud to welcome Frances to the stage. There's one additional thing I just wanted to say here because I think it's important that we honor the whole person in this community. Frances also sings with the Oakland Interfaith Gospel Choir and will always say yes to a karaoke night out. Oh, okay, all right. So I know we might have an after party tonight, so I don't know where we might end up at a karaoke bar. Who knows? Frances, to be continued. All right, Frances, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
I'm going to start with this question, if that's okay. Minds Matter Bay Area is a mentorship nonprofit focused on helping low-income students break the cycle of intergenerational poverty. And we do that by addressing an issue called college undermatching, which is where low-income students that are driven and determined are not really giving them, they're not given the chance to go to some of the more selective schools in the country. I would love to talk with you about your personal connection to our mission. So here's the question. Frances, what is your personal view on the importance of building one's network and community? And how did mentorship play a role in your life in expanding your insights, worldview, and self-confidence?
Thanks for the question, Irene. And I just want to say it's really a pleasure to be with all of you in the Minds Matter community. I should say Minds Matter Bay Area community, as you've rebranded. Congratulations. And also because the themes that I've heard so far tonight are really resonant for me and are very much connected to my own story and my own kind of journey as I was pursuing both educational and professional opportunity. The other theme that's really been resonating with me is the power of family. And I just wanted to make a small shout out, but let's not put too much focus on table 2 over here because my daughter Danny is here. She's 12 and in the 7th grade. And I asked her to come with me because I think there's so much power in what you all are doing here and what you're committed to, this idea of helping promising young people get access to opportunity. And I think it's important for our young people to find inspiration where it exists. So Danny's here, don't look at her. She doesn't want people looking at her, okay? And so I'm happy to share a little bit more about my own background. What I would say is I grew up in Coney Island, Brooklyn. Coney Island, oh, we got some New Yorkers in here? Amazing. Coney Island is a working class community, and I was born to both immigrant strivers and working class strivers. My mom immigrated to this country from Colombia. She was undocumented for a number of years, learned the language, kind of worked incredibly hard, and then over time, as my sister and I got older, became a paraprofessional, eventually went to school on nights and weekends, became a kindergarten teacher, and through her, I saw the example of hard work, striving, and aspiration, and that you can really deliver on your dreams. My father was a box sorter at UPS, and he never had a chance to go to college, right? But what I learned from him were the power of hard work, for commitment to family. And so all those lessons were things that I took with me. But what I found was, as I was navigating educational opportunity, my parents did not have the ability to help me navigate different kinds of systems. It's not because they didn't want to be supportive, they just didn't know what to do. It wasn't their own personal experience. And so what I appreciate, and one thing you'll notice is I'll always mention the nonprofits that played a huge role in my life, because I'm here having this conversation with all of you because of the countless mentors who poured into me, the nonprofit organizations who provided me with access to opportunities and wraparound supports as I was navigating different stages in my life. And so this concept of mentorship, this concept of community is really important to me because through being a part of this organization called Prep for Prep, I was a prep kid starting at the age of 10. And basically what it was a 14-month academic boot camp that helped me get access to a private school. And when I went to that private school, my whole world was opened up in terms of opportunities. And prep also provided me with tons of additional exposure opportunities, like it sounds like Minds Matters does as well, in terms of what I was doing in my summer, kind of broadening my view of what was possible for me. When I went to my prep school, I'll never forget this one mentor that I had, one teacher. Her name was Bobby Swain. She was my biology teacher, but also my college guidance counselor teacher. And she was someone who said to me, Frances, I see you. I see your strengths. I see your growth areas, but I see your leadership potential. And guess what? You can go to Harvard. That was not something that I ever thought was possible for me. It was not something that any of my family members would have said. And so that idea that the role that one individual can play in helping you to expand your possibilities, right? The role that one individual can play to help you dream a bigger dream, it's so impactful, right? And I can tell you countless other stories of how different mentors helped to change how I viewed what I could do, right? And so I think the work that you're doing is so powerful. And the last thing I'll just say here is one of the most important ideas that was shared with me through another nonprofit I was a part of called SEO was this idea that it's not just about you. It's about the people who come before you, and it's about the people who come after you. So the people who come before me are the ones who have been pouring into me to help me dream that bigger dream. And so therefore, my role and my responsibility is to think about how I can help bring the next generation up, right, and how I mentor them. And so what I think is so powerful about what's happening here, too, is that's how you build community. That's how we create this virtual cycle, I should say virtuous cycle for change and for possibility. And so really excited about the work that you all are doing here and what can be true for Bay Area young people.
What did I tell you all? Francis, I had the privilege of actually having a call with you a few weeks ago, and one of the things that really struck me is that, as I always say, and I think you would agree, that we come of age at any age, right? And there's a lot of growing along the way, and that stop does, like with someone like Angeline, this is just the beginning, right? Just like your journey when you got to Harvard, the steps of Harvard was also just the beginning. One of the things that we're really curious about as an organization, because we're so focused, it's not just about, yes, it's about unlocking all these opportunities, but it's also about listening to yourself and knowing which opportunities are right for you, which opportunities are great for someone, but maybe not for you. We've sometimes found in our community that that's particularly hard for our students to decipher, because even just getting any opportunity feels so incredible, and you feel like you have to seize every one. But in fact, you really do have to also spend some time listening to yourself to figure out which ones are right. Can you share a little bit more about that in your journey and how you listen to yourself along the way?
Yeah, happy to share. The first thing I would say is it's hard to be the first. And so for me, I can share some of the firsts in my life. I was the firstborn child, first generation college student, first to work in corporate America. The first kind of go on, kind of first generation American on my mom's side. And when you're the first, there's all this pressure that comes with it, right? Some of it is pressure from family, they don't necessarily intend to do it, but, there's pressure to kind of achieve, especially I think for many immigrant families where the sacrifice that went into play to kind of get you here to kind of be able to have greater levels of opportunities. Sometimes there's the pressure you feel because, all these nonprofits are providing so much support and you want to show them your investment was worth it, thank you. But really, I think more than anything is the pressure you put on yourself, right? I started looking at my family and really thinking about what were all the things that had to happen for me to be in the seats that I was in, and I wanted to pay it forward, and I also wanted to pay them back, right? And so a lot of what I focused on was how can I make it easier for my family? So Angeline, when you were saying some of that, it really resonated with me, right? I didn't want my parents to have to worry about money, and so what I found was I was making choices to maximize opportunity to make it easier for my family members. And so through the different nonprofits I was a part of, I actually got access to different opportunities in finance. And so I interned on Wall Street every single summer after I graduated from college. I worked at Morgan Stanley. And I was doing that for a number of years. But what I found was that around year 3, I was having trouble getting out of bed. I just didn't feel motivated and inspired to do that. But the thing that I kept thinking about was the fact that the paycheck that I was earning was more than both of my parents combined, in my first year out. And that felt like in some ways I made it, I can't let this go. And so I felt all this pressure. But I physically could not get out of bed. I was not motivated to do it. And the reason why was because I wasn't living into my purpose and my passion. At least for me, that paycheck was not enough. So I found that in that moment, I started asking all these different questions. Well, what are the moments when I get really energized, when I get excited? What are the moments when I feel like I'm lit up? What are my values? What do I think I'm best at the world? What are my skills? What can I do that no one else can do? And that led me on a learning journey when I started to ask more questions, to kind of look inward, to really ask myself, what is it that I want to do as opposed to doing the things I was supposed to do? And that then led me to kind of reach out to my different communities, both my college communities, the different nonprofit communities that I was a part of, to then start to learn from other people to know what were they doing and why were they doing and why were they excited about what they were doing. So what I would share is, and I won't take you through all the twists and turns because I've done a lot of different work to kind of get to this point at NewSchools, but would love to share with you some of the lessons that I've learned along the way. And I do think this first one is really connect to yourself, to understand your values, understand what you're best at the world at, and to understand what is your unique contribution, as you're living this one life that you have to live. And check in with yourself regularly. So for me, it came in like a physical manifestation of I'm not motivated to go into work. For you, it might come up in different kinds of ways, but how are you actively checking in with yourself to know if you're doing what you're supposed to do? And I am gonna just check my notes just here because, as Clara is saying, talking in person, not being in front of a screen with all your notes is different. It's feeling different these days, isn't it? The other thing that I really came to think a lot about was the importance of relationships, right? The current job I have came from my connection with one of my business school professors. And I didn't know at the time that taking this course and going to her office hours and learning more about her work could turn up that 10 years later, there was like a opportunity for us to work together. And there's something about serendipity, these warm ties, these relationships you have. You never know where it's going to go, but you need to cultivate them, and especially cultivate them with the people you admire and that you feel like you have something to learn from. The other thing that I've been thinking a lot about is I felt all this pressure as a young person to create my life plan at 21. Okay, I'm graduated from college. Here's what I'm going to do for the next 20 years. I was going to work in Morgan Stanley for 20 years. I was going to retire, and I was going to go create a nonprofit. So the nonprofit was part of the story. But what I realized was you can only create goals in 1 to 3 year increments, and that those goals really need to be focused on learning, both learning new skills, building competencies, but learning more about yourself. Everything else, you have to be open to letting serendipity play out. And that's the thing, you don't know what opportunities you're going to learn about, and the more you learn about yourself, the more you learn about what could be possible. And so for me, that was something that's really played out in my own life. And then the idea that you should just take the best next step in your career. Don't worry about, is it the right thing? Is it going to play out for the rest of your life? In some ways, even taking quote unquote the wrong step, right? I've definitely been in a job where you kind of go 3 to 4 months into it and you're kind of this is the wrong spot. But there's still value. The learning that you do about yourself, the people you meet. Again, you never know where it's going to go, and those job switches are not permanent. You can decide where you might want to go next from there, and that's the thing. This point, Angeline, you talked about not being afraid. It's so important, and I felt like I was asking all the wrong questions. So how does this look on my resume? What are people going to think about me? And instead, I feel like the power that we all have as we invest in ourselves, as we deepen our education, as we build our skills, is the freedom to make choices to live a purposeful life. And so if anything, I would say is step into that power, step into that freedom, and don't allow that fear to hold you back.
Francis, I always said we'd get to a point in this conversation where we're just going to riff. Let's do it. I am incredibly moved by what you just shared. And one of the things that I'm just going to come back to, because it's around this point that you made, which I thought was really powerful among many, that there were relationships that you ended up building with people that you wouldn't have known where they would have gone, right? That's just the magic of people, right? Human connection. You are now someone who has had many mentors in your life, and you've also, I would imagine, mentored quite a few people too. What is it that you look for now in a mentor, and what is it that you hope to offer as a mentor?
Oh, I like this question. What I look for in a mentor is someone who's going to give me feedback. I think one of the most important things that we need as we are walking through this life are people who are willing to hold a mirror up and say, I see you. But I also see there's some stuff going on over here. What's happening there? Can we interrogate that? Can we pull back the layers to understand what might be happening? And someone's willing to give you feedback with love, with respect, but also hold you accountable to being the best version of yourself. And I think it's so rare that we actually, get that kind of feedback so we can be our best selves, but also rare that we actually open ourselves up to truly receiving it. And so to me, that's one thing I look for. I look for intergenerational mentors. I believe that I can learn. I want to learn a lot from the expertise that those who might be, 10, 20 years older than me or more have to offer, because you've kind of been there, seen that, and I want to harness that wisdom. But I also think one of the things, especially working in education, so NewSchools Venture Fund, we're focused on K-12 education. I believe that our younger generation is going to heal our society. And I feel like the ways in which our young people are moving through this world and how folks are advocating for change and thinking about how to disrupt systems, that energy to me is very inspiring. And there's ways in which I want to make sure that I don't get calcified in my approaches, and then I'm getting new inputs in so that I can also think differently about the work. You know, we work in innovation. We're trying to fund the best new ideas in education. But I can't assume that what I think is the best idea is what's best, right? How are you constantly getting that information? And so to me, I think mentorship can come in all kinds of forms from all kinds of people. And I think so much of the work we need to do is to broaden our view of expertise and to broaden our view of the kinds of inputs and insights we need to improve our own work. When I mentor people, the things that I think about is that unfortunately, I'm still one of the only or one of the few in many of the rooms that I'm in. And I believe in the power of representation, because sometimes you can't be what you can't see. And so what I want to think about is how can I pour my time into, especially young Latina, so Angelina might be coming for you, who are early on in their work to think about how they might have folks who can help share a little bit about what their journey has been like. So that to me is something that's very, very important to lift as I climb.
I could talk with you about this all day. We do have another topic that I want to get to, but we also have a Q&A after this section, so ask your questions, save them, write them down right now, because we're going to get more from Francis. We actually have a room full of people that have careers in investment. In investments. We have a lot of investors in the house, people who work on that side. And you yourself are part of overseeing a $45 million grant-making budget, again, focused on 4 areas: innovative schools, learning solutions, diverse leaders, and racial equity.
Look at you without notes.
I was busy studying. I think it's really, one of the things I was really struck by, I worked on the East Coast actually for nearly a decade. NewSchools was very vital, I think, to some of the communities that we worked with. Boston and Connecticut, New Haven, Hartford, parts of Connecticut. And one of the things I've always been really struck by in terms of NewSchools philosophy is that you really want to invest in people who know their communities and therefore have really on the ground understanding of what their communities need, and that's really where you feel the best ideas come from. Now, sometimes, not always, but sometimes that could run counter to, I would say, some, not all, donor philosophies, right, around where solutions come from, how solutions should come to the table. And so I wonder, as someone who oversees this grant-making budget and someone who is a very donor-facing sort of role, how do you educate your donors on, what it is that communities really need and where great innovation really comes from?
Yeah, this has been a key effort that we've worked on at NewSchools. And like you said, Irene, I believe in the power of proximity. I believe that when you're creating new solutions, you have to be deeply connected to the people that you seek to serve, and that ideas need to be co-created with those very constituents, right? So the people who have the most to gain and the most to lose from those investments need to have a say. And I think one of the issues in education, but also in social impact more generally, is sometimes solutions are coming from the outside and being imposed, and sometimes can be done in a more of a, let's say, a missionary kind of mindset, right? And so those ideas don't sustain, right? Because those are outsiders coming in. And so also from a very practical and I think strategic perspective, the idea of how do you make sure that social change efforts get grounded into a community so it can have impact over the long term, you actually need it to be embedded. Right, and how does that happen? It happens when you have local community leaders, when you have demand for the work, the co-creation, co-architects in the work. So that's a value we've had, and so we've made a huge shift in a lot of our work. Where, at this point, last year was 75% of our dollars went to organizations led by people of color, because we do think that is a huge lever, right? It's not the only way to get proximity, but it's a huge lever for getting change, and so we really value diversity. But what I found is that as we started doing our work, both in our specific investment areas, so we have a portfolio that's directly focused on diverse leadership and thinking about how do we close the gap in terms of who's powering education and who our students are and getting more diverse talent into the work. What I found was that as I was engaging funders to do this, what they would ask were, well, how do you know diversity is a lever for change? Or how do you know that we actually have diversity gaps, right? There isn't a great data set. Or how do you know, and the list went on. And so what I found was what we needed to do is to ensure that we were raising enough general operating funds so we had enough capital to kind of do what I'll call internal R&D, which is to pilot some things, to get going on some things, because we knew funders and donors were lagging us. And so we said, how do we get started by investing so we can make the impact-based case? But also, how do we make sure that we are helping funders to learn alongside us to go on this learning journey? And so that was a combination of gathering the existing research and evidence base. There's so much data on the power of diversity. All of you, there are many corporate sponsors here. I know you're experiencing this in your day-to-day as well. We commissioned new research, we brought together roundtables, but really at the end of the day, what I found to be the most powerful lever for change were the very personal relationships that I was developing with funders. Because what we're really afraid to do right now is to say the wrong thing, right, when it comes to diversity, right? It's such a polarized issue, so rather than get ourselves in trouble, we want to stay away from it. And what I found was that in those deep personal and what became trusting relationships, people could ask their questions without feeling like they were going to get attacked. And it was in those moments where it's like, I'm really thinking about investing in so-and-so, but their idea is not showing up in the way that I'm used to seeing ideas, or this leader doesn't have the resume that I'm used to funding. Help me think this through. And so I really think, and I think this is a way for us to kind of heal our society as well, how do we come together across lines of difference, build deeper relationships, and get to know each other better, such that we can have these kinds of conversations where we can truly push each other's thinking. And so that's some of the strategies we've been using as we think about this work.
A last question from me before we turn it over to the audience in just a moment, but I think that in your work, you get this, my sense, of course, is that you obviously lead your own organization, but you're also investing and thinking about the leadership of the organizations that you're investing in. We are living in a very interesting moment right now. I won't use the buzzwords, but you guys are probably thinking them, right, around the fact that we are, for better or for worse, becoming more of a hybrid work environment. People have different sort of realities and ideas also in terms of what's going to work for them. And I think there's a lot more, I don't know if turbulence is the right word, but there's a lot more uncertainty, I think, in the talent landscape on some level. As you are both thinking internally in terms of the talent community within NewSchools and externally within the portfolios of incredible partners that you work with, what would you say are key things that you think regardless of the times that we're in are really essential to think about as we continue to build strong talent economies for our incredible organizations?
Yeah, it's such a big question. I'm sure all of you have thoughts on this as well, and so I wish we could have more of an interactive conversation too. I'll just share a couple things just to kind of ground what I'm going to say. At NewSchools, we've hired 2/3 of our existing staff during the pandemic, so it was like, whoa. That's in part, growth and, kind of ongoing transition as people moved away into different things. More than 60% of our staff identify as people of color. And more than 50% of our staff were educators and former school leaders. And so we are constantly working across lines of difference at NewSchools. The other thing I'll mention is that we used to be a fully in-person staff in Oakland, and now we're 100% remote. So we're not even hybrid. And so we have times where we're trying to come together as a full organization, but we're having to learn how to operate fully remotely. And so I feel like this is just one example of like how I think the workplace is fully changing and our workplace practices are changing, and we're all being asked to update how we normally approach engaging with our staff and with our colleagues. One of the things I'll say before I get into kind of the specifics that we're doing in our portfolio is, as I look across education, we're at this moment where we're being asked to rethink our staffing structures. What we've asked from teachers over the last year is completely unsustainable, and we've been asking teachers to do more and more and more. To be content experts, to be behavioral experts, to be social emotional learning experts, to be mental health supports, and to provide, kind of be like a first responder in some sort of way, as we saw educators providing technology, Wi-Fi, food vouchers, etc. The job has become too big, and there's so many adults, right? And think about the ways in which all of you are stepping up to volunteer and support Minds Matter in some sort of way, who are interested in getting more involved, and we can have, I think, much stronger pipelines of talent into education if we actually thought about the roles differently. And so there's a huge, I think, effort right now to think more to think in different ways about how we might power schools and the different roles that could exist, whether it's tutors, how parents can get into the profession, having more apprentices in the classroom. And so I'm really excited about that. And so I think part of that, if I were to connect to what we're thinking about internally at NewSchools, is we're being asked to think much more flexibly and much more in a human-centered way. And so the first thing that I would say is, how do we bring more of our humanity into how we engage with each other at work? We just had this shared experience where all of our lives were upended, where so many of us were navigating loss, where we were caring for our parents, maybe our children, and being pulled in all kinds of ways. And it's like, how do we actually create a space where we can bring that vulnerability and that authenticity about what's really happening in our lives? One, to forge better connections with each other, but also to think about what are the ways in which we need to be more flexible, because not only does that help to create a more supportive working environment, but what it also does is it helps with retention, right? I think what all the things we're talking about is like, what is the morally right thing to do, which also happens to connect with a strategic lever for change, right? And so that's something that we've been thinking a lot about. We've also been thinking about, how do we make sure that culture, right, both the formal things we do inside of our organization and the informal moves that we make, it's not just owned by one leader and who's in charge, it's owned by everyone. So how are we really communicating our values? How are you talking about what our expectations are? And how do we enlist everyone into creating the environment that we want for our organization? Because we all contribute to making it. It's just the person at the top. And so that's something that we've been focusing a lot about. And really, we're learning too that culture can be created in remote environments. And we really recently just had an all-staff gathering where everyone came together and we're like, oh my God, this is great. We're all connected. And I think, we have to let go of the idea, and I'm one of the people, I have to let go of it too, that culture and connectedness can only be felt if you're in person with each other all the time. And so how are you investing in the other ways where we can kind of build those relationships through fun activities, but even in our more day-to-day check-ins? And so that's something we're thinking a lot about.
Here, Minds Matter, we can be proof positive that that's actually true. Over the pandemic, the 2 years of the pandemic, from the first year to the second year, completely remotely, we retained close to 90% of our volunteer community, and of course, close to 100% of our student community, which is amazing. When I first came to the organization, some people, I heard a volunteer say, he said, Irene, Minds Matter for me is church. It's church. And he said, and not necessarily because I believe in, for him, organized religion, but he said it was the spirituality of it. It was coming and serving and being a part of a community of like-minded people that believed in the power of transformative service as he did. That was incredible. We've never crunched the numbers, I don't think, but I believe that the volunteers in our organization probably have an average tenure in our org longer than their average tenure at their workplaces. I think what's really powerful about what you're saying, though, Francis, is that whether it's at your workplace or it's with a volunteer organization, that more and more people are moving toward wanting to look for that kind of purpose, that kind of a place of church, if we want to call it that, right? Where there's something deeper than just the perks or certainly the paycheck, right? It's much deeper. It's the thing that you were talking about earlier in your career. You were waking up and going, this isn't enough. I need something more. And wherever we can find that and build that, whether it's within our workplace communities or within some of these organizations like ours, that's a real powerful thing to do.
100%. And the last thing I'll just say there, I think it's like we're all searching and craving for community. We're all craving for a place that we can belong. And I think now more than ever. And so I think that's the thing that we should be thinking about, right? How do we make our workplaces, the places where we decide to lend our talents, places where we feel that sense of belonging?
So well said. Thank you so much, Francis. We are going to invite Angelina up to join us for a Q&A in just a moment. But can we actually give a round of applause to Francis? Francis, thank you so much. Appreciate it.